On Poland Today, we talk to the people who have witnessed the remarkable changes in Poland. I'm your host, David Kennedy. Today's guest was an economist advising on the economic transformation of Eastern Europe, and now head of the International Management Institute at the Zurich University of Applied Sciences, and a professor at Kosmiński University in Warsaw. He writes on everything from Kazakhstan to state-controlled assets. That's Professor Christopher Hartwell. Great to have you here, Christopher.
Great to be here in person.
I know, because we've talked for maybe the last 6-8 years online.
Exactly.
All the way through COVID as well.
Exactly.
And of course, you are one of the people who witnessed change throughout Central and Eastern Europe, did a lot of things in Ukraine. You were head of the Case Institute at one stage as well. And you saw things changing. And we want to talk about that in part 2. But first of all, it's AI really that brought you to Warsaw today, isn't it?
Correct.
So what exactly brought you here today? There was a conference at Kosmiński University?
Yes, responsible research in business and management. They have their group that concerns themselves with things like the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. And each year they have a conference on a pre-selected theme. This year was artificial intelligence.
But of course, you come across it all the time in your work now, don't you?
Yes, and fortunately, it's become a fantastic tool for researchers, but unfortunately, from the teaching side, it's been a tool of malfeasance by administrators, by researchers, and of course by students.
So what kind of dreadful things are happening then?
Well, AI has a tendency to hallucinate references because it's basically a probabilistic machine. It tries to guess where you're going, it tries to guess what you're looking for, and it tries to give you kind of what is most probable. So sometimes it'll say, oh, you should look at this reference from Mueller, 1997, because it sounds like something that Mueller would have written in 1997, even if it doesn't exist. This is kind of your entry-level malfeasance. And then, of course, we know that AI is so advanced now beyond kind of first and second generation that you could write an entire paper in just one sitting, couple of minutes, and then you have a fully formed research paper, whether or not it's right, without any sense of context, but it's done.
And this happens.
This does happen. There was a recent study at the University of California, Berkeley, that said about 26% of all casual AI users in university have used it to cheat at some point.
Gosh. And so they're cheating. And who are they cheating? Are they cheating the university, or are they cheating themselves in the end?
Well, they're cheating both. I mean, obviously they're paying to be there for the university, so the university gets paid either way, but they're cheating themselves. And they're robbing the time from instructors who are trying to impart something to them, a specific way of thinking, a specific, a set of tools. The problem is that AI can be used for so much, and I think it's incumbent upon instructors to be able to kind of guide people, students especially, PhD students or even undergraduates, towards something that is responsible, where they can use it for writing code, for bouncing ideas off of. But it's when you get into the generative AI, where you're actually having it create its own thoughts and passing them off as your own, that's just the same problem. That's plagiarism in just a different package.
And we could go down the wrong rabbit holes entirely when we're using those kind of tools and research, and essentially maybe the findings of that research can be dreadfully wrong.
Yes, this is true. And the problem is that with some kind of public data that's available, people from universities who have extreme pressure to publish. And China is the biggest offender in terms of this because, again, there's limited places and there are so many academics. They have this extreme pressure to publish, so they're using AI to either create something that doesn't necessarily advance the frontier of science, or they're just using it to kind of hack databases. So you have publicly available data, and then AI can run through all sorts of regressions and analysis and find that there's a correlation between X and Y. Whether this matters, we don't care. Whether this is something important, whether this advances the frontier of science, doesn't matter. We found a result, and now we can publish it. And this is the other problem, is that not only it challenges integrity, but it challenges what we think is actually noteworthy as science.
So what do you do then? Where do you put the guidelines in order to ensure, first of all, that it does those amazing things? Because let's face it, I mean, if something can read right through a whole library in 5 minutes for you, or even if it was a day, then that's something that would take 5 lifetimes for somebody to do in person. And so there are those amazing things it can do, but how do you then stop it doing the other things?
Well, we have to catch people young and make sure that they don't get into bad habits when it comes to AI. AI is a wonderful tool that is problematic. We said the same thing about the internet. You could say the same thing about the telephone when it came out. Every kind of leap in technology, we need to get used to it. We need to understand what it can kind of give to us. But the kind of people that use AI in the worst sense, in terms of writing a paper and passing it off as their own, are the same kind of people who would have plagiarized, or the same kind of people who would have cheated. So they generally tend to be pretty sloppy. It's easier, we have now kind of telltale clues as to what comes from AI, and I'm not going to tell you now, because in case it gets broadcast and students are like, yes, this is a good idea, I won't do that. But, it's a kind of a cat and mouse game in thinking about how we catch it or not. But it really needs to be kind of instilled at the beginning that AI is this great tool that can help you do things that you couldn't do before, but you could write before. And we're here to help you to write, and we're here to help you to analyze. And that's the whole point of what you're doing here at the university.
Now, those same worries about university, I mean, they are like threefold as dangerous when it goes out into the wider economy.
Yeah.
And I was reading a recent study, and that was on Genic PL recently, about the fact that some 67% of workers who were polled were saying that they were using AI for their work. But of course, there are dangers sometimes because they feed, company data into these things. Right. And if companies try and stop them doing so, then they find ways around it. 25% of people don't really care about the security of their services in their company. They would never prefer to get round that and use their favorite AI to help them in their work.
Yeah, AI is the internet on steroids. Remember in the 1990s how we were also worried about purchasing anything online. I don't want to give them my bank card. I don't want to give them my credit card. Who knows what they'll do with it? But eventually we became kind of used to it. There were safeguards, there was encryption kind of put in place. Right now, it's even worse for the reason you say, whether or not we're getting trained on data which we don't have the liberty to disseminate, or AI is taking that data and then utilizing it elsewhere. There need to be kind of these safeguards in place, and it's probably going to cause more supporting technology to be necessary in terms of what is encrypted, what can be released online, as well as the internal procedures that say you simply cannot do this. But the one good thing about that is that if it is as widespread as the study says, if everybody is doing it, then we're all kind of in the same boat. Everybody is using AI. That's the worry is that you tend to get homogenized in terms of the language you use, in terms of kind of the analytical approaches you use. But in the business world, if everyone is using it and this data is kind of leaking out, no one is really being advantaged in any way, shape, or form. It's not like your competitor has suddenly uploaded to AI and then I can ask ChatGPT what my competitor is doing.
So in some ways, we're kind of post-secrecy in a way.
We've been post-secrecy for a long time, since the internet, since something like social media came out, where we decided to stand on a mountaintop and tell everyone what we're doing. We're post-secrecy for a long time. It's whether or not firms are now actually post-secrecy.
And what's the difference in emerging economies when it comes to LLM models? Are we disadvantaged? And do we have maybe advantages because there's not the same amount on the internet in Polish, Spanish, or Arabic? How does it differ from country to country?
Yeah, well, it's a double-edged sword, because I'm sure there's not a lot out there in terms of Polish. I mean, I know how large language models work for English, probably very different in terms of what it does to the Polish language, in terms of the language that it uses, and it has less to draw upon. Now, AI is not a database, right? It's a machine that, again, is trying to guess what you're saying, but is also looking around, looking at the web and trying to kind of isolate. And so there's less of that in Polish than there is in English. There's more of it in Spanish. It's fantastic in that it can then translate things, the classics that you need from English that you might not know because you live in Białystok and you've had no formal training in English whatsoever, but then you can transfer it into Polish and then kind of read it in your mother tongue, which is fantastic. But the other problem is that, are we going to have this digital divide between the US, China, to a lesser extent, the EU, where the data centers are, where the training is, where the models are being created, and other countries that necessarily aren't going to be represented? And again, if the models need to be trained, they're being trained and they're absorbing the biases of the creators, they're absorbing the biases of you, who's helping to train them, and they're getting further and further away from something of practical use for that person in Białystok.
You've witnessed many things. Gosh, I think you're probably younger than I am, actually. But
53 this year.
You're a youngster. You're a youngster, but you were here at the start of the transformation in Eastern Europe. First of all, in Ukraine. Now, then was it Ukraine and then Russia and then Poland, or how did it go? Your trajectory.
It started in Ukraine. I was at the Harvard Institute for International Development and worked on the Ukraine project in 1996, 1997, and 1998. I had first started coming to the region, though, a little bit earlier, 95 and 96. So most of the transformation in Poland was already done. But then I had shifted eastward in Russia and Kazakhstan, and then done a lot of stuff in the Caucasus as well. After the Rose Revolution in Georgia, there was a lot of advising. Azerbaijan, they'll always be advising because they keep making the same mistakes over and over again. Armenia in the late 2000s, 2007, 2008. So,
and right, we always ask the question about remembering back to those days and comparing life in Poland with life somewhere else. But in your case, right, the difference of coming to Poland, having been in Ukraine so often. I mean, Ukraine's a different place now, but very quickly differences began to appear between Ukraine and Poland and how things were done, didn't
It's
they?
almost as if you were describing my 2016 book for Cambridge University Press. Two roads diverge, Cambridge University Press. Yeah, I mean, the divergence happened, like you said, almost immediately. And even if looking at kind of Soviet statistics, you say that Ukraine, even if you kind of discount what they said, Ukraine and Poland were fairly similar in terms of their
right
level.
About the GDP the same.
Exactly. The only real big difference was the level of industrialization in Ukraine versus in Poland. And Poland had a slightly higher percentage of land that was privately owned, that was allowed to be privately owned, but otherwise pretty much at the same level. But then Poland went big bang route, and Ukraine just went the Russian route of lurching from crisis to crisis. And then obviously it's not till 2014 and the Maidan Revolution that Ukraine really begins to reform. It was very, very sad to see that they kind of kept making the same mistakes over and over again, while Poland, its neighbor to the west, was able to skyrocket.
Now, Poland did get its big businessmen who, maybe seemed to be everywhere when it came to a privatization, but it didn't have the same kind of culture of oligarchs. Mm-hmm. And is that a key thing, that there was maybe a greater democratization of the economy?
Yeah, well, I mean, it was a massive thing that Poland didn't have oligarchs. I mean, you don't see it so much throughout Central Europe, right? The Visegrad Four. But Poland did something very, very important in that they kind of they slow-walked privatization. So privatization really didn't begin in earnest until 1997. However, the liberalization had started already in 1989. Therefore, you have new businesses coming in. Once you take away the monopoly power of the state-owned businesses, you get new businesses with hungry people who are looking to make a buck on anything. And they began to erode the power of the state-owned ones that were no longer protected. Therefore, when the time came to finally sell the aging dinosaurs, they weren't worth as much. In Russia, they were worth everything. In Ukraine, they were worth everything. You knew if you had this enterprise, then you were athwart the commanding heights of the economy. In Poland, by the time 1997 rolls around, you buy them, and it's not that much because somebody else has already taken all of your market.
Yes. The counterpoint to that may be, of course, that if you look at the giants in Ukraine and the giants in Russia, mm-hmm. Well, for many years they dwarfed some of the Polish companies, but now we're seeing that Orlen, for example, mm-hmm. is worth more than even Rosneft.
Yeah, transition is a long game. You don't measure it by how good your state-owned firm is doing at any one point in time, mainly because the state, especially in Russia and Ukraine, when you start taking more political decisions rather than economic ones, you tend to make the wrong decisions.
Now, thinking of all these last 3 decades or more even, if you were to think of a particular pivot point in history, and this is what we ask all of our guests, what would be that point for you? Oh,
the pivot point was 1989. The fact that you had a peaceful transition, that you were able to vote the communists out on 4th of June, 1989, is unbelievable. The fact that even all of the compromise and wheeling dealing that went into it, that Poland is still feeling today, especially when it comes to the Constitutional Tribunal, the fact that it was able to be implemented, and then you were able to have such an expansive and speedy economic liberalization, without a doubt, that set Poland on the path. It happened in Estonia, it happened here, it happened to a far lesser extent in Hungary and the Czech Republic, and it's really why Poland is the way it is today.
Well, at the same time, when I came here, 94, mm-hmm. then if there were companies coming in, they chose to go to Budapest or to the Czech Republic as their headquarters for CEE. Mm-hmm. That doesn't happen anymore, does it?
I mean, Poland always had the larger market, so it
Yes.
was always going to be more attractive in that way. But yeah, Prague is a bit more Western. Budapest, the Hungarians had goulash communism, right? They had more experience with the liberalization of the 1980s, but unfortunately they kept going that kind of gradual path, and it led to major problems and kind of the rise of populism there. Poland, on the other hand, was slow and steady wins the race, especially if you look at it coming through the global financial crisis. Only country that actually grew during the global financial crisis was Poland. Like I said, it's a long game. Transition isn't something that happens overnight. You can put the building blocks in place overnight, but the performance comes later.
Overnight, that is maybe the kind of, you could say that as the sort of byword of the transformation that you witnessed. Especially if you were to try and think of maybe one person who for you would be the person that changed things.
Right. Well, I mean, it has to be Leszek Balcerowicz. Full disclosure, he was my advisor at SKH, where I did my PhD. But without the Balcerowicz plan, basically boiling it down to anyone can sell anything, right? It's just kind of a focus on the key institutions of a market economy, on private property, on contract enforcement, on trade openness. I mean, and a lot of people forget, how precarious Poland's external position was in the 1980s. The renegotiation of Poland's massive external debt was crucial. And I think Balcerowicz was one of the few people who could help to kind of run that through. He had the gravitas, he had the connections in the West. I think he was instrumental. But I think we saw that a lot in the successful reformers. Again, in Estonia, where we have kind of Mart Laar, or in Czech Republic with Václav Havel. You see, or Václav Klaus. You'd see people who were, instrumental in taking these ideas and knowing what needed to be done and being able to rally the populace behind it, at least for a short time.
Bread, of course, went up in price overnight.
Mm-hmm. Everybody hates that.
Some people say, though, that before that, everybody knew the shop in Warsaw where they could get fresh bread. But after that reform, there was fresh bread everywhere, and the ones that stood out were the ones that didn't have fresh bread.
Exactly.
And so the question is, though, you say that transformation was a long game. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but many people say that there were too many eggs broken at that time during that transformation, and that the kind of the empathy only came a little bit later of dealing with the kind of the personal issues relating to that transformation.
Well, I mean, you can be of two minds. You can kind of keep the large social safety net that occurred under communism. It was terrible, but at least there was a little payment for this, little payment for that, little payment for everything. You could keep that as kind of for social stability while you're undergoing everything else. But in that case, you're still keeping parts of the plumbing of communism. And this is something that nobody voted on, right? This was something that was instituted by the Communist Party. In democracy, we yell at each other about fiscal policy. Mm-hmm. Government should spend here, it shouldn't spend here. It should spend this much, it should spend more, it should spend less. That's something that should come about under the institutions of a market economy, under democratic institutions. I mean, you can say there are always going to be winners and losers in transformation because some people were advantaged by the previous system and then disadvantaged by the change. I mean, in terms of the empathy, why not have it occur under a democratic system rather than say, oh, but I had it better in the past? Why don't we all vote together and say, this is what needs to be done. Now we look after the poorest people. Now we look after the elderly people. Some countries were able to do that and kind of keep the safety net, the Czech Republic being one of them. But I think you don't get the institutions that facilitate a market economy unless they actually get grown up underneath a market economy. You can't just kind of bring the communist institutions along and then be surprised when they act like communist institutions.
So now, over the last two governments, because instituted by the peace government, but carried on by the current government, there are more safety nets. There are greater provisions for the needy, child benefit as one of them. How do you see that now? Is that because Poland is now rich enough to provide that, or do you see dangers in that as the deficit grows?
Oh, the debt is becoming a problem again, and it's coming about because of the budget deficit and because of the cost of servicing debt, right? We're servicing old debt with more costly new debt. There are major dangers ahead. And I'd like to say I called this. I said this in 2016 in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal, that especially the 800 plus program was going to be very difficult to maintain, along at the same time that you lowered the retirement age. I mean, you think about it. What is the program doing? It's encouraging women to have children. Okay, so that means you've increased the population. There's more services that you need then for that. The money is probably going into consumption. It's not being invested, right? It's covering the needs of the child. You've taken the woman out of the labor force. So now there's fewer workers, which you then replace elsewhere. And Poland's been facing demographic decline, as every other country in Europe. It's actually been buoyed now by 1 million Ukrainians fleeing the war. And then you have people that retire early. So it's a fiscal disaster waiting to happen. I called it in 2016. It's happening now. As you see the debt continue to inch up, the deficit continues to inch up. There were other things that kind of were put in place under the previous government, I think, that also were fiscally irresponsible. But guess what? You have an entitlement. That's just it. People love entitlements. Once you have something there from the government, it's very, very difficult politically to take it away. And what are you going to do? If you can't cut expenditures, you raise taxes. Does anybody love to have higher taxes? No. And so you're at a political impasse, especially now with kind of divided government in Poland.
And yet, socially, it's been a success in the sense that, money has been put into the pockets of people who at one stage were really suffering. And not only that, but there was generally a culture of people thinking that they had lost out.
You mean in regards to the 800 plus?
Well, 800 plus, the lower taxes for younger people, for example. That suddenly, so you went from an economy where the young people felt that they had to go abroad to work,
right?
And there was maybe less consumption, which would also keeps the economy going than in Western economies.
No, I have no problem with lower tax rates for youth. I would like lower tax rates for everyone. I think the government does too much as it is. It needs to have less revenue. But the revenue has to go down, the expenditures have to go down. I have no problems with that. It's the expenditure side that is problematic. And then everybody wants to have a piece. You think now about kind of the 800 plus. What are they discussing? They're saying maybe it shouldn't go to the highest income of households. Maybe we should have it targeted at the needy. Means testing is a great way to kind of eliminate fraud, but also to kind of save billions of zloty. Doesn't mean that you don't care about people just because you're trying to do the best that you can with the limited amount of money that there is available. Resources are always scarce. This is the one ironclad law of economics. Our wants are infinite and our resources are scarce. So we need to think about these things. But again, it's very difficult politically to kind of move into that sense. You can vote on empathy, but it still runs up against how much money you actually have in the pot.
So back in the 1980s, late 1980s, when Poland was crippled by debt, apart from anything, high interest rates, they couldn't even service the debt.
Right.
It was, I think it was $8.1 billion or something like that. About
massive.
The equivalent of 80 billion in today's money. But we're now way above that. We're like double that. That's the issue now.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you look at, again, where kind of the money is going. In the 80s, communism, terrible at providing consumer goods. So in the 80s, it was all about providing consumer goods. We'll go into hock to get the consumer goods. We don't care. And then, obviously, as I said, kind of the Club of Rome, all of the negotiations that had to happen then to kind of rescue Poland from that debt. Now it's being spent on two things. It's being spent on social expenditure, it's being spent on defense. But it's about 2/3 social expenditure, 1/3 on defense. And you really can't fault Poland for spending more on defense, given what's happening next door, given what's likely to happen in the future if there isn't this deterrent against kind of Russian aggression. So defense is one of those things the government should do, right? If you believe in the night watchman state, it's supposed to guard the shores and then let somebody, FedEx, deliver the mail. So you've got the spending on defense. It's whether or not there's enough to spend, again, to get back to kind of a communist-sized nanny state, a welfare state. We have budget deficits that keep going up every year. They're blowing through the targets, and we're getting dangerously close to kind of the constitutional limit. Maybe not dangerously close yet, right? What is it? 47%, I think, of GDP is the way it's calculated now. But that's because we keep shoving things off the balance sheets, right? This is an off budget, like what happened in the previous Tusk government in terms of the pension funds. And all of a sudden, those are suddenly coming back on budget because it makes things look so much better. It's lots of little shortcuts that are not addressing kind of the root of the problem, which again is this spending on social expenditures. Some things are good, some things are necessary, some things are stimulating, like you said, the kind of the lower taxes for the youth, for people just starting out. But there's a little bit that's going to everybody. They need to be this kind of consolidation.
And defence. Now everybody says, oh yes, of course, we have to spend on defence. But it then becomes maybe a kind of a black bag full of expenses. How would you advise those overseeing that budget to ensure that it is spent properly?
Yeah, I'm not a defense economist, and I know there are large kind of debates about what's the best bang for your buck, whether it's, kind of missile defense systems, whether it's missiles, whether it's tanks, whether it's, large conscription, having a large standing army, et cetera, et cetera. So I don't get involved in those debates. But the thing that you have to do is you have to apply the same kind of efficiency metric to defense that you do anywhere else. Are you getting value for money? Are you going to the best value supplier, not necessarily the cheapest? And how do you kind of keep procurement on the up and up? And there's lots of people that work in terms of government procurement to see how you can make it not only efficient, but again, kind of corruption-free, because defense is one of those places where you can lose a lot of money very, very quickly. We always hear the stories in the United States of the $900 toilet seat that the Pentagon purchased. So they're not immune to it. What do you think is going to happen in Poland? There's probably a lot of leakage and a lot of loss that can be averted. But again, you have to be on top of it.
Chris, I mean, we could talk all day.
It's true. I have to fly tonight, but other than that,
we'll have to talk on other subjects, maybe sometime again online. But it's great to see you in person.
Same here, same here.
And we've covered a lot of ground. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
And guests, I think that you'll agree that this has been a fascinating deep dive, to use AI speak, into the transformation with Professor Chris Hartwell. Thanks for watching. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.